Thank you for coming. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you for coming to the home show and to our lovely talk. I'd just like to start by letting you know there is a VVox app which is accessible from your QR codes. You can ask questions. There are polls on there as well. If you do have any technical difficulties though and you have a question, don't worry about it. Just put your hands up. When the mic comes to you, we can ask you the question at that time. I'm Lauren. We have a lovely panel of experts here today, and we're going to start with a little bit of a presentation, go through all of the slides, and we'll go with questions at the end as well. But as I say, thank you all for coming, and if you need to use the VVox app, you can at any time to ask any questions through there. Over to Sir Resi.
Morning, everyone. Morning. So look, name's Pa. Firstly, I just wanted to say to all of you, great to obviously see all of you here. Home ownership should not just be a dream, it should be a plan really. And that's why all of you basically are here today. I come to this every single year because I believe that times are tough, things are rising, but there is still, of course, a way to still own homes. And one of the ways that is, I'm going to, of course, talk to you about today, which is basically shared ownership. So I'm basically, as I said, from Resi. So I'm the resales progression manager there. I'm just going to talk to you a bit more about shared ownership and basically how it runs as well. What we're going to be talking about here, what shared ownership means, who can buy it and what does it cost, routes to shared ownership and what comes after, and of course the buying process, and that includes, of course, new build, and that includes resales as well. So what does shared ownership mean? Firstly, you buy a share, and then you pay a rent on the remaining share, of course, that you do own. Now, you can buy anywhere between basically 10 to 75% of a property at any given time that, of course, you want to purchase the property. Now, you only pay a deposit on the share that, of course, you want to purchase. Now on this, I actually wanted all of you to just get your phone out because I wanted to do just something with you, just so that you basically get the numbers. Now, let's say you wanted to buy a property for 400,000. Essentially, if you wanted to buy 25% of that, that's 100,000. So on a 5% deposit, all you need to pay in that is basically £5,000 because it's 100,000. If you wanted to buy that same property on the open market, a 10% deposit, as my good friend here will tell you, would be basically £40,000. But as I said as well, you only pay on basically the share that you do own. So the rent is calculated on the share that basically you do not own. And this is where I want you to take your phone out. So if you take that same property that you bought for 400,000, you basically, of course, on 25% share, that's basically 100,000. The 300,000, which is the unowned share, if you have a calculator now, I want you to do this. If you take most housing associations would basically charge you 2.75% or 3% on basically on the unowned amount that you own the rent on. Now, if you take 2.75%, which is basically what we charge on most of our one, you divide that by 100, and basically the unowned amount, just times that by 300,000, and that would give you exactly what you have to pay on the rent. Can someone tell me it should be 8,250? Is that what you got? Yep. So you divide that, of course, by 12, and that's the rent, essentially, that you would pay on the unowned amount. And you can do that for every single property that you buy in shared ownership. It's not just on the £400,000 one. The last bit is, I hear a lot of misconceptions about this, that essentially you cannot buy additional shares, and that is absolutely not correct. If you buy a 25% share of the property, you can do what's known as staircasing. So later on, if life happens, and of course you get promotions, or you find a partner later, you can come together and basically you can do something known as staircasing, which is you buy additional shares until you own 100% of the property. It's important for me to say this as well, because a lot of people think this. Just because you own the share, let's say you have a 2-bed, no one comes to your room and says, I own one of these shares. You do own, of course, the whole property. The housing association, of course, has an interest in the property, but that could be said the same for even a lender as well. And of course, there's the element as well of you can sell when you do want to sell, and you can sell the, of course, share that you do own as well. So who can buy shared ownership? Your household income, if it's in London, must be, of course, below 90k and up to 90k. If it's outside London, it's of course 80k as well. It must be affordable, so it has to be between 25% and 45% of your income. You get a bit more information on that once I do pass this on. One of the other things I do want to say is you do not have to be a first-time buyer. Again, this is a myth that's out there. The only thing is you cannot own any other home, whether in England or anywhere basically in the world. But we do have, of course, a lot of transactions that's sometimes known as a chain, which basically is you sell your home and then you can buy a shared ownership property. But your home must be sold before basically you can buy a shared ownership property. Of course, have to be a UK resident or, of course, have the right to remain as well before you can buy one. So these are just the routes to shared ownership. There's new build, which of course you can buy off plan, brand new homes that of course, we of course have a lot of them, and there's of course a lot of housing associations that are out here today. If you go back down to the 3rd floor, they're showing you of course the new builds that they do have. One of the biggest things and issues that people have is leases. No one wants to buy a short lease. And what's a short lease? I'll just run through this quickly. So anything sort of between 85 to 80 years, normally people don't want to buy that because it's hard to get lending. And of course, the lease is quite short. Now, on the new model lease, which is the new shared ownership, you get 990 years on anything that's basically built new. That's as good as freehold because, you know, I don't know if any of us are going to be lucky enough to. I know I'm not getting to 990, so there's no issues there at all. And then, of course, there's the resale bit. Now, this is where it becomes quite interesting, because every time people talk about shared ownership, there's this thought as well that they all look like that, but they don't. A shared ownership could be a period house, it could be a house as well, and that's where the resale comes into play, which is actually the team that I look after. So this is where you tend to get various different types of properties that you can buy. Now, on this bit, however, there's, of course, varying lease lengths that you can get. So sometimes you might have to do what's known as a lease extension, but there's a wide selection there that, of course, you can get. But that's the resales route. So what does it cost? There's, of course, the deposit. Just said to you, again, using that same example. Of if you were to buy one at 400,000, 25% at 100,000, 5% of that, you're of course looking at £5,000. There is solicitor cost and disbursements as well. There's the survey cost and the moving cost that of course you have to think about as well. I think on that bit, I just wanted to of course say this to you guys, and this is very important. When it comes to solicitor, because I found this myself, I've worked in property now for 10 years, people always tend to try to go for the cheapest solicitor that you can get. And I get that. I was there. I actually did that as well. But one advice I would give to you is get the best solicitor that you can get. I have seen situations where someone has ended up paying more in their solicitor costs than actually the deposit that they had to put down. Because what's quite important, and I just want to touch on this quite quickly because I know obviously I'm a bit timed as well, is the fact that obviously a shared ownership lease is very different from a normal lease. And most solicitors who deal with just the transaction of normal properties do not actually know how to transact when it comes to shared ownership leases. And you would be 3-4 weeks down the line and then they'll turn around to you and go, I actually don't understand this. You have to then go and pay another solicitor, and some of these solicitors would actually ask you to basically pay them again as well. So just something to note. I'll be around so you can ask me more on that if of course you want to. The ongoing costs, I touched on it already. The rent is on the remaining share. There's of course the service charge cost as well. There's the mortgage payment which comes into it. There's the ground rent, which does not tend to happen now on the new builds that are being built, so there's no ground rent on those. But if you go for the older ones, you might, of course, have to pay ground rent on some of those properties. But it is something that, of course, we are moving away from. And this is just basically just wanted to talk to you about the buying process. So in terms of new build, I would always, again, advise you to go to the marketing suites. So, for example, our marketing suites, go in and make sure that you are talking to the advisors there. What you would get a part of our process is there's a dedicated consultant who would sit down and do something known as, of course, a qualification, which is just to find out exactly what it is you're looking for. Are you looking for a 1-bed, a 2-bed? They also would guide you to a financial advisor. Again, good friend's going to touch on this. Very important. It's people sometimes when you're buying a property just jump and you want to go to a Barclays or you want to go to a Santander. I would highly urge you not to do that. Definitely speak to a mortgage broker. These guys know a lot of lenders who are out there that you will never know. That's more affordable. And you can get them for so much cheaper rates. But you will never know that without speaking to a financial advisor. So it's so important to talk to them. After you do talk to them, you can, of course, go through the journey of viewing the properties and see what you want. Next step is normally reservation. As soon as, of course, you find something that you want, you would have to pay £250. That normally comes off the completion funds that you would have to pay at the end of course, the journey. You appoint a solicitor. I've touched on that already. It normally takes actually 4 weeks from when you appoint your solicitor to actually exchange contracts. And then to complete, it can take as short as basically 8 weeks. So from when you appoint your solicitor, 4 weeks, target date to exchange your contracts. And that's the point when you hear exchange of contracts, that's the point when you put a deposit down and basically you have to buy that property. Because if you do not buy it, you will lose your deposit. It's at the point where essentially there is no return. Then you would get sort of 4 weeks after that to, of course, complete on the transaction. Now, the second bit is the resales bit. Now, this is actually what I look after now in my team. This is a bit different in that this is the wide variety of properties, and it is quite different in the sense that this journey is a bit longer. Whereas the other one can take 4 to sort of 8 weeks, this can take anywhere between 12 to 14 weeks sometimes. I had their dedicated consultants because there's 2 processes to this. There's one element where, of course, someone is selling their property and you're buying that property. So just as you would, if you were to go to a Foxtons, a KFH, we do have estate agents who would, of course, take you around these properties because someone does own it, and then you, of course, have to look around it. Now, there's a first stage in terms of that where, of course, the consultant, who's the front-end consultant, would basically show you around the property, make sure that, of course, your affordability is checked and you're assessed and you can afford the property that, of course, you want to buy. Now, once that's all done, there's an application form if you do find something that you want, and then, of course, our offer letter is sent to you. And as long as you accept and want to proceed, it is then turned to another consultant. Now, this is normally someone known as the progression consultant, which is where my team basically come into play. There's something called a memorandum of sale, which we issue out, that would be given to your solicitor, the seller solicitor, and of course, our solicitor as well, who's the Housing Association solicitor, to basically start the works. The reason why this takes a bit longer is, again, you would hear about this. There's something called a management pack, which is not required at all if you're buying a new build property. But if you're buying a property that someone already owns, there's something normally called a management pack there, which look at things such as building insurance, service charge payments, and your solicitor basically needs to look at all of those. And that's the progression phase. As I said, it can take anywhere between 12 to 14 weeks. And exchange and completion on this one, rather than the other one, which normally takes a month, this only takes about sort of a week. So you exchange at 1 week, and normally completion is set on the following week. What comes next? If you do, of course, decide to buy a shared ownership property, as I said earlier on, you can sell it. How do you do that? There's something called a valuation that you have to get. It's a RICS valuation. So it's unlike an estate agent, Housing Association will not just say to you, this is your property price. You actually have to go to something known as a RICS surveyor who will look at the property and ascertain exactly how much the property is worth. Once that's given to us, then the transaction, of course, will start. There's something called a nomination period if you come to a point where you need to sell your property. Now, that can be anywhere between 4, 8 to 12 weeks, depending on the Housing Association. That just means that the Housing Association, of course, has the time. These are, of course, some of the properties that we do have that, of course, you can look at that we still have available. Do go down, of course, to the 3rd floor. My colleagues are there who can talk to you about it. And yeah, we do have a podcast as well where my manager, Sarah Ellis, is normally there. She normally talks about a lot of these things that I'm saying to you about. But like I said, I'll be sitting around as well. You can come to me and ask any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.